How's it going, everybody? This is Cameron White with White Light Astrology, and welcome back to your favorite weekly horoscope. What the fuck is going on in the universe for June 17th through June 24th of 2019? Thank you guys so much for being here and liking and sharing and commenting and subscribing. I love and appreciate every single one of you guys. Last week was super rough with that Mars opposed Saturn transit that we had going on. However, we're finally getting off of that this week. We're going to feel a little bit of change going on this week. It's not going to be as hardcore as last week, but nonetheless, there is astrology to talk about. This week's highlights, we have got Mercury conjoining Mars starting off this week on Monday. That's going to carry on until Tuesday, and this is a weird Mercury-Mars conjunction. I'm actually going to be talking about that in my Mercury retrograde video that I'm posting later on this week, so be on the lookout for that. However, this is the first time that Mercury is going to conjoin Mars in the cycle that it's going to conjoin. So we'll have Mercury conjoin Mars on Monday. Then later on next week, or actually when Mercury goes retrograde, it'll conjoin Mars again, and then it'll conjoin Mars again later on. So there's a lot of conjunctions happening with Mercury and Mars, and it's going to be really important to remember as we go on for the next couple of weeks. However, we also have Mercury entering shadow this week, which is also really important because I'm sure you guys, just like me, are not ready for the next Mercury retrograde that's going on. And while Mercury is going to be entering shadow this week, Mercury entering shadow is always kind of like the pinpoint base of when you can look back at a Mercury retrograde and go like, yep, that's when the event started. That's what was going on. So this week, as we have Mercury entering shadow, you're going to start to see a lot of things pop up that we're eventually going to make our way back to. Also this week, we do have the Sun entering Cancer, as well as, I don't know how much I want to mention this, but the Moon is going to be opposing Mars, while Mars and Mercury are opposing Pluto exactly. And it's kind of a weird, not comfortable transit. However, it's not going to be as immediate and like in your face as that Saturn opposition was. So we'll be talking a little bit about that. However, later on this week as the Sun moves into Cancer, this is when the whole vibe is changing. You know, we're getting out of Gemini season where it's always a little bit more sporadic, a little bit more, you know, up to change. And as we go into the Sun entering Cancer, onto the yearly solstice, this is when we're having an initiative move. This is when we're starting new things. And this is when you can kind of get that energy of initiation going a little bit more. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the horoscope. So starting off today on June 17th, we're going to be having the Moon enter Capricorn right off of the full moon in Sagittarius. So as you probably felt with this full moon in Sagittarius, it kind of, you know, not only elevated our mindsets a little bit more, but it was more of an in-depth look at, you know, what are we creating? What are we trying to grow into? What is the space that's there? What do we believe? What do we feel? And as the Moon goes into Capricorn, this is when things get on that serious note. You know, I hit a lot of that on last week. However, as the Moon goes into Capricorn, this is when it's time to more detach from the emotional nature of things and really look at what needs to get done, what needs to get, you know, handled, what needs to, where do you need to take care of your responsibilities. However, what I would like to say is now with the South Node there and Saturn's retrograde there and Pluto's retrograde there, there's a lot of releasing energy. There's a lot of letting go energy. There's a lot of like, this is revisiting the past. This isn't necessarily the direction forward we're looking for. While the Moon is going into Capricorn, this is just going to be a big time again of what structures do we have in place that aren't necessarily working anymore? And where do we have to detach ourselves from the emotional, you know, relationship or the bond that we have with, you know, whether it's a process or way of that we do things, whether it's a person or if it's a very specific area in our life, it has to come down to, you know, what's worth letting go of. And if we have to do that, it's kind of like, have you ever kicked out a roommate before? It's kind of like, dude, I love you, but you kind of suck, and I need to kick you out, and I don't want to do this, but you kind of have to. That's like the Moon in Capricorn. Like, it's not, you can't just be like, oh, well, he's my friend, let me support them and whatever, and let, you know, if it's tearing you down and you're paying more of, you know, the rent and stuff like that. So while the Moon is in Capricorn, it's going to be a really good time to get a little bit more serious about things, but have a healthy level of detachedness in order to get the things that you need to get done. Also on Monday, this is when Mercury is going to conjoin Mars, and while Mars is in Cancer and it's sign of fall, it's not working all that well, it's not sure what exactly to do, it's trying to be sensitive and it just can't. While Mercury conjoins Mars, Mercury is kind of like, you know, speaking the message of Mars, kind of like putting it out in the open, you know, broadcasting it live on the radio and on the TV. And as Mercury is in Cancer, where, you know, this is kind of like the sense of communication, the style of which it's being brought, our understanding of it, and the mindset that we're under when it comes to how we're communicating has a little bit more to do with empathy and sympathy. It has a lot to do more with where do we need to protect, where do we need to nurture. And this is, you know, not always a happy feeling. a lot of people give, or I should say, Cancer is always really given like the emotional side of things and feelings and, you know, being cared for and nurtured and stuff like that, which is true. However, if Cancer's not nurturing you or someone you know, everybody else is, you know, attacking them basically from their perspective, and that's why they want to protect other people and, you know, bring that hard shell around things. And as Mercury conjoins Mars, I think this is really about, you know, what direction do we need to take and what actions do we need to take that are going to not only better nurture us. And I know that's a really broad statement. However, that looks a lot of different ways for a lot of different people. And a lot of, you know, we all go through different phases of life. However, what actions do we need to take that are really going to nurture us and protect us right now? Because at this moment, we don't have expendable energy. We don't have a lot of extra energy like we did earlier in January with Mars and Aries. With Mercury conjoining Mars, this is like getting the understanding of like where we need to put our mental attention and focus, along with our actions, and, you know, following through with that and putting them more in line with the things that matter, things that, you know, sorry, I don't have enough time for this. I got to take care of myself. Sorry, I can't commit to this. I have to take care of this responsibility, and that responsibility is me and the things that I need to protect, the things that I need to nurture so that I'm safe, so that I'm, you know, I guess fulfilled in a certain way, I guess taken care of. That's that Cancer part of us that we have. However, as we go into Tuesday, this is when we're going to have the moon starting to conjoin Saturn, and this is where it gets a little bit more serious and it gets a little bit more, okay, you know, like, what do we have to handle? What do we have to address? And what do we have to let go of? Because as the moon first hits Saturn, where it's really showing us, you know, what's holding us back, where we need to be a little bit more structured and rigid on. And then as it hits the South Node almost immediately, or actually before, this is kind of like letting go of all of that stuff. This is kind of like, okay, this system doesn't work anymore. This structure doesn't work anymore. How are we going to, you know, and this sounds like depressing, and I don't want to put it that way, but this is just kind of like, you know, there's certain things that really aren't working, and it's not like big life stuff that we're getting, you know, I don't want to say we're not getting big life stuff thrown at us, but it's kind of like, we're getting small doses of it as we go along. And as the moon goes into Capricorn, hits Saturn, hits the South Node, this is kind of like getting that dose of it again and being like, I remember what isn't working anymore, and I got to make sure to stay away from that. But the good news is, while the moon's in Capricorn, this gives us, again, a healthy detachment from the situation to where we can actually do those things without getting completely emotionally involved. As well, on Tuesday, on June 18th, we're going to still have Mercury and Mars still conjoining each other as they move to 22 degrees Cancer. So that whole, you know, Mercury projecting the message of Mars in Cancer is going to be pretty loud for the next couple days, so keep that in mind. Now, as we do move forward into Wednesday on June 19th, we've got a couple things going on. We have the moon still in Capricorn. It's going to hit Pluto. It will be opposing Mars and Mercury, where this comes back down to, like, the moon's in Capricorn, also in its detriment, opposing Mars, like about to fight Mars in Cancer, who's in its fall with Mercury right there. And they're kind of in this conflict of interest where the moon in Capricorn's like, hey, we need to get this done. This is what needs to be addressed. You know, I don't want to say I'm just the messenger, because that's a Mercury thing, but you get what I'm saying. While Mercury and Mars are opposite each other, while also on Wednesday they will be opposite Pluto, so keep that in mind. That's kind of puts a little bit more of a bigger, it's kind of like when you watch a movie and in like the first 30 minutes they show you something and you're like, oh, that's going to be a big deal way later on though. Like, it may not be a big deal at this moment, but it's going to play a big role later on. That's kind of like Mercury and Mars oppose Pluto. And this is kind of like, while Mercury and Mars oppose Pluto, while Mercury's giving that message to Mars, it's kind of like, yeah, taking this action is necessary. It is vital to us. But it's going to change something right now that we're not really going to see until later on down the road. So keep that in mind as you're really, you know, don't just emotionally react and be impulsive. Like, kind of think about this stuff and think about what's going to matter to you most right now that's also going to help you later on down the road. And as the moon starts to oppose Mars and Mercury too, this is just kind of like having to deal with that frustrating confrontation that you can have with this. Now, as we do move forward onto June 20th, this is when things do get a little bit lighter. It was a pretty rough last week, and the next couple days are a little bit just serious is a good way to put it. Like, we're not just fucking around. On Thursday, this is when we're going to have the moon enter Aquarius. It's going to start to make a trine to Venus and Gemini. So while the moon goes into Aquarius, we can be a little bit more open with ideas. Aquarius is still a Saturn-ruled sign, so it still has some rigidity and structure to it, but it allows some breathing room. It's kind of like the difference between like a cookie cutter house and like an architect, like, designing a house that works with the sunlight and the natural, airflow of the area. Like, that's the moon in Aquarius, where it could still work, you could still build a structure, but it's a little bit more unique to the situation. It works a little bit better. It has a little bit more freedom with it. And so as the moon in Aquarius starts to trine Venus in Gemini, where Venus in Gemini is, again, we're wanting to be more social, we're wanting to connect, we're wanting to have more mental stimulation, more of that Venus in Gemini fun. The moon's going to start to trine Venus, where this is giving us a little bit more pep in our step, a little bit more of a funner clarity and idea around tackling our situations, tackling what's going on in our reality. So as we go into Thursday, be a little bit open-minded about stuff. However, on Thursday, we're also having Mercury enter its shadow. So later on in a couple weeks, we'll have Mercury station retrograde, but from here until basically Mercury goes direct, Mercury's going to go over this spot in the sky, over the spot in your chart. And usually right when Mercury enters shadow, this is like huge signifiers of like, whatever happens on this day, you're going to see come back around. So I don't want to say like don't initiate stuff or don't start things. However, while Mercury goes into shadow, just know that like whatever, news or whatever's happening during then, know that you're going to be coming back to this and know that this is going to take a couple more weeks to kind of get a handle on. Now, as we do move into Friday on June 21st, that's when we're going to have the sun move into Cancer. Cancer season begins. This is a cardinal sign. This is the summer solstice. This is when we have the days are the longest and the nights are the shortest. This is when, the good way to put it is cardinal signs start things. Cancer season starts summer, Libra season starts fall, Capricorn starts winter, Aries starts spring. And as the sun moves into Cancer, where we're talking about this warm, vital energy, this very tropical energy of, this is what can be created when you have all of the right mixture of water and sunlight. Like, that's kind of like what the spring does. And now that we're here in the summer, we can let that, it's not about starting it. It's not about, having spring begin. It's about having that continue. It's about, okay, things are going to start getting hot now. We need to start taking care of ourselves a little bit more. We need to start, being a little bit more aware and a little bit more conservative. This is how we're going to start that, and this is how we're going to initiate that. And so a sun ingress isn't the biggest deal in the world, but you will start to see it play out as we move on. Then as we move into also on Friday, that's when the moon's going to start to sextile Jupiter. That's pretty positive. That's kind of like Jupiter seeing a bigger picture here, while the moon in Aquarius is still connecting little dots and stuff like that. However, as we do move into, I lied. I forgot to mention this. Friday, Neptune stations retrograde. If you watched my videos for a while, I can care less about an outer planet stationing retrograde. However, Jupiter is squaring Neptune this whole week. This is a lot of truth being kind of not exposed. Jupiter's not direct, but Jupiter is retrograde. And this is kind of like, I don't think this is the truth, and I don't think I believe in this shit. And while Neptune's in Pisces, I don't even need to talk about that. Shit's blurry, shit's confusing. While Neptune stations retrograde, while Jupiter's in the middle of the square, this is going to be a really big time to look at what ideologies, what illusions have you been falling under, and where do you need to reevaluate your perception of truth. That's going to be a really big deal underlying this week. But I really think that what that looks like is when it comes to, what's my perception of truth, we're going to have a better understanding of that with the Mercury and Mars and Cancer thing, where it's like, the truth right now is I need to take care of this shit, and this isn't right. Now, as we do move into Saturday, though, that's when the moon's going to go into Pisces and immediately start to trine that sun in Cancer. And this is opening up space. Like, the moon going into Pisces, all this water energy, all it's doing is creating and allowing space for events to happen. They don't necessarily have to happen. However, creating the space and creating the environment that can allow that type of energy to allow that type of event take place will usually kind of make it happen. It's kind of like if you have a tropical environment, you're going to have frogs probably growing somewhere that turn to tadpoles, and you're going to get bugs and so on and so forth. However, as the moon does go into Pisces, this is kind of opening up a broader picture of understanding all of this stuff. Because, dude, this Mars opposed Saturn shit, rough. Like, Mercury opposing Saturn, rough. Mercury's about to go retrograde. We're about to go into eclipse season. There's a lot of, big stuff going on. And as the moon goes into Pisces, trines the sun. It's, Jupiter is also co-present in Sagittarius, so it's eventually going to be making a square to that as we go into next week. This is just allowing space for like us to have a better understanding of what is happening right now. And that can look a lot of different ways. Whether you want to meditate, you want to go and check out, you want to go and have a fun time, you want to go hike or do whatever. As the moon's in Pisces, just embrace what you're going through. Embrace and try your best to understand it. And it doesn't have to always make sense for someone to understand something. Does that make sense? Should. Well, based on that logic, it should. But anyway, as we go into Sunday on June 23rd, that's when we're going to have Venus oppose Jupiter, and the moon's going to conjoin Neptune and square both Venus and Jupiter. So there's a lot of T-square energy going on right here. And as Venus starts to oppose Jupiter, Venus is in Gemini going like, I have all this stimulation. I'm starting to see all of these different things I can get involved with. I'm having fun in this way. I'm wanting to learn. I'm wanting to discover. Jupiter in Sagittarius, retrograde is kind of like, all that glitters is not gold. You can have all of this fun stuff, but what does it mean to you? Why are you getting yourself involved in all of this stuff? And while Venus and Gemini is just trying to have a good time, Jupiter's applying a philosophical question to all of Venus and Gemini's actions. So as we have Venus oppose Jupiter this week, really look at, what am I getting myself involved into and why? What is your why and what is your reasoning into doing that? And whatever your why is, just take that in. That's just good feedback. And maybe you'll figure out, hey, maybe now that I know why I'm doing this, maybe I don't want to do it. Or maybe now that I know why, maybe I can start to commit fully into doing this because I understand it better. But then, also on Sunday, Moon is going to conjoin Neptune. And I wanted to hit on that because that's always a weird time. It's always kind of like this, it kind of looks this way and it kind of looks this way, and it's really confusing and dualistic. While the moon squares Venus and squares Jupiter, though, I think this is really about looking at, like how I said with Neptune being retrograde, what's your truth and what's your why? How are you perceiving things, and where do you need to jump to the other side to see your way of seeing things better? It's kind of like, you can have one perception, but if you take a step back, get out of yourself and get out of your mind for a second, you can see your situation a lot better. And I think this is what this moon in Pisces is really going to allow us to do as we finish this next weekend. Now, as we do go into next Monday, when we're doing this video again, that's when we're going to have the moon start to go into the later degrees of Pisces and apply to a trine with Mercury and Mars. And I think that this is going to kind of give a little bit more support to Mercury and Mars as they're kind of struggling to figure out what to do. But as the moon's in Pisces, kind of being able to make sense of it all at the moment, this is kind of like more encouraging energy to pursue on those things that have made a little bit more sense as we've gotten through the weekend. Now, that's basically it. Now, as we get into next week doesn't have a whole lot going on. One of the big things is we do have Mercury entering Leo, where it's going to station retrograde at 4 degrees. But then after that, not a whole lot's going on. It's just mostly build up into the week after that, which is really big. We've got Mars moving into Leo. We've got the new moon, which is going to be an eclipse. It's going to be the solar eclipse in Cancer. Then we have Venus going into Cancer, and we have Mercury stationing retrograde. And that's a lot. That's a lot going on. Especially now with the sun going into Cancer. Eclipse season is just bound to happen any minute now. But with that being said, that's basically all that I got for you guys. So thank you guys so much for being here again and liking and sharing and commenting and subscribing. I love and appreciate every single one of you guys, and I'll be seeing you next week.